Do you have a fulfilled life? What is a fulfilled life actually? What constitutes a fulfilled life? With this question, the communication psychologist Schulz von Thun has dealt, of all people, in his new book, Erfülltes Leben, literally fulfilled life. And today we're going to have a look at that. Welcome to the Soft Skill channel. My name is Sebastian Jung, and today I'd like to present to you the book Erfülltes Leben, Fulfilled Life by Friedemann Schulz von Thun. Unfortunately, once again, this book is not available in English as Schulz von Thun's earlier books. It is still rather new, so I haven't lost hope for an English edition, but since his earlier books have not been translated, it's probably unlikely. You probably have heard Schulz von Thun's name before on this channel because I've made plenty of videos about his models in regard to communication. Communication is his key topic. He has written several books about it. The most important ones are Miteinander reden, volume 1 to 3, literally speaking to each other. They have been published between 81 and 98, so a few years have passed since then, and in the meantime Schulz von Thun has mainly done cooperations where he has written books together with other people, and he has acted as publisher for a couple of books, but this is the first one in quite a while that he has written entirely by himself. And the surprise is, this is for once not about communication, but about a fulfilled life. On the website of the Schulz von Thun Institute, there is a short interview with him where he explains that due to the pandemic he had plenty of free time since a lot of events, probably training, seminars he would have held, had been cancelled, and he had used this free time to write this book, and he has done this by elaborating on a lecture that is part of the training for coaches at the Schulz von Thun Institute. And this lecture he has expanded into this book. In this book, he presents a simple model for a fulfilled life that looks like this. We have 4 quadrants, alpha to delta, and we have a circle in the middle, omega. And what those 5 fields mean, we will find out now. First, we've got alpha, and alpha is wish fulfillment. So we realize our wishes and our dreams, be it by our own doing or by chance or luck. Usually it is the combination of both. This may sound simple, but it is not, and this is what this chapter is about. First of all, we may have some wishes, some desires that we are not even aware of, that are hidden deep within ourselves and that we first need to uncover. On the other hand, we may have some obvious wishes and desires that will not make us happy in the long run, where we are a bit misled. Now, of course, there is a lot of influence from the outside. There are expectations from the people around us. There are social norms. There's the media. There's advertising. Schulz von Thun says we might end up with a member of our inner team who tries to push for a certain direction, for certain desires, very loud and enthusiastic, but who doesn't speak for the entire inner team and our whole self. So here, the model of the inner team makes an appearance, one of Schulz von Thun's established models. He uses some of his established models in the book, as we will see. Another important point here is that desires may also have an important counterpart. For example, we may have a desire for change and adventure and excitement and things happening and trying out new things, making new experiences. But of course, this desire also has a counterpart, like security and homeliness and being safe and having things that are established and well known. And of course, both are important for us, and the goal is not to strictly go in one direction and ignore the other, but to find a good balance between those two directions. Another important aspect is, especially in this alpha quadrant, to also appreciate that which we have already achieved, because we only feel the need, not the fulfillment. A desire that we have already fulfilled, that we do no longer realize. We don't even know it is there anymore. So it is a good idea to sometimes consciously look at what we have already achieved, the wishes we have already fulfilled, and to appreciate that. The pursuit of our personal happiness is important, especially for people who find this difficult, to think, oh, I don't deserve this, or it's not right to care for myself, I have to care for others, this is important. Here, self-care is quite important, but of course, we also want to be there for others. And this is what the beta quadrant is about. Beta is fulfillment of meaning. Schulz von Thun says we are part of the whole and we wish to contribute to the whole. We may be part of a family or of a company, of a society, even a part of mankind, and we want to contribute to that. We don't just want to deal with our very selves and our own needs, our own desires and wishes, but we also want to go beyond that, and we want to contribute something and do something meaningful. And of course, interacting with others is quite important to us. The relationships we form, the recognition and appreciation from others is quite important. In regard to meaning, Schulz von Thun also brings up Viktor Frankl. And for Viktor Frankl, as you might know, meaning is quite a central topic. In this channel, we discussed Frankl's book, Man's Search for Meaning, and there as well, meaning is the central topic. A very important topic in this chapter is the tension between alpha and beta, between I would like to and I should, between taking care of our personal wishes and desires and between being there for others. And here again, Schulz von Thun uses the square of value and development that we have already discussed in another video. It is important to strike a balance here, because if we favor one direction too much, it will turn into a negative exaggeration. For example, if we care too much for our own wishes and desires and ignore others, we will become egocentric and selfish. But on the other hand, if we only care for others, only make sure we are there for others, we will sacrifice ourselves, and this isn't a good direction either. So it's important to reconcile alpha and beta and to strike a good balance here. Here Schulz von Thun also brings up the Ikigai model, which we will look at in some future video. The quadrant gamma is about biographical fulfillment. This is about all of the events and experiences that we have had and that make up our lives. Here Schulz von Thun recommends that we view our life a bit as a story or an adventure, maybe as a novel or a movie. If we imagine that our life would be turned into a movie, which would be the key scenes? Which would be the moments that really put us on a certain path, that are really decisive? What are the greatest moments? What are the strokes of fate in this movie, in this life of ours? And here it is important that even the crisis, even the strokes of fate, the bad things we encountered and lived through, those also have a value. Here it becomes apparent that a fulfilled life is not automatically identical to a happy life. For Schulz von Thun, happiness is the fruit and the result of a fulfilled life. But a fulfilled life also includes strokes of fate and bad experiences, negative experiences. In this chapter, Schulz von Thun also gives a small biographical example. He talks about his elementary school time in the countryside. This part has a small remark at the beginning that you can skip it if you want to focus on the model and aren't that interested in the life of the author. But I read it obviously and I found it interesting. Schulz von Thun explains that especially in coaching and also in therapy, it is important not only to look forward to where we want to go, what we want to achieve, how we want to develop and what we want to become, but also to look back at our past experiences and to deal with those past experiences. And Schulz von Thun presents a simple model to help do that, where experiences are sorted into 4 categories. We have two factors. The first is whether it is a positive or a negative experience. The second is whether it was an event of our own doing or whether it was something that happened to us. And those two create 4 possible combinations, and those are used to deal with different kinds of events. I won't go into any details here. This would make the video too long, just so you know this is also part of the book. An important aspect here is that the meaning of certain events often only becomes clear in retrospect. For example, if you are married or in a relationship, think about the moment where you first met your partner. At this moment, you didn't think, oh, this is quite an important moment. I will spend the next several years with this person. But this only became apparent in retrospect a long time after, and there are many such events in our lives. It is important to note that the idea here is not to reduce our life to a few key events. But smaller and less important events are also important, like small anecdotes, small experiences, small events. And here Schulz von Thun points out that it is helpful to work on our communication, which is his key topic, as I said. And here he brings up his communication square, the 4 sides of a message, and he says that by enriching our communication, we can also enrich our common day-to-day experiences and our lives. An important warning he gives in this chapter is that too much gamma ambition can be dangerous. He points out that nowadays most people don't believe in an afterlife anymore, so we don't have this idea of, oh well, I can do what I missed here later, but we have the thought that what we want to do, we have to do right now in this life, and this might lead some people to overburden one's own life. Schulz von Thun mentions adrenaline junkies who are doing, for example, extreme types of sports to really feel themselves. And he also brings up the fear of missing out that is has its own term nowadays and is an important topic nowadays. The quadrant delta is about existential fulfillment. This one is a bit abstract. It's about spirituality, not necessarily in a religious context, but in a more general one. Schulz von Thun asks us to appreciate the wonder of life, to become aware what a great coincidence it is that we are born, that we are alive, that this world exists as it does, and to really consciously be aware of that and to appreciate it. In this context, Schulz von Thun also brings up the value of humility. Humility is quite important as a counterpart to self-efficacy. Self-efficacy is promoted heavily nowadays. The idea that we can achieve anything if we try hard enough, that everything is possible. And here it is important to also understand that chance or fate or whatever you want to call it is also quite powerful. You recall, for example, our discussion of The Black Swan by Nassim Taleb, where this was an important aspect, and to show some humility. The second part of this chapter is a bit more down to earth. Here Schulz von Thun basically says, if all this spirituality idea is too abstract for you, maybe you can have a small enlightenment in your everyday life, and this is strongly related to mindfulness. Schulz von Thun also brings up the concept of mindfulness here. He says we should, in our day-to-day lives, appreciate the moment, really be aware of the individual moment and really live it and appreciate it. He says often we just see a moment as a means to an end, as a stepping stone to the goals we want to achieve, and we should really appreciate this single moment for its own worth. So mindfulness here is also used as a counterpart to an excessive focus on our goals and our objectives. And here again, it is important to strike a balance. Oh, and Schulz von Thun also points out in regard to the inner team that we can recruit and establish new members for our inner team who will, for example, stand for this idea of mindfulness and the appreciation of the single moment. Finally, we have omega. the circle in the middle that touches all of the quadrants, that is part of all of the quadrants. And this is self-fulfillment, because we realize ourselves in all of the 4 quadrants. In alpha, it's our very own personal wishes and desires that we try to fulfill. In beta, we use our very own talents and our own knowledge to contribute, and we contribute according to our values and ideals. And in gamma, we are the hero of this novel or movie of our lives, and our personality, our character, shapes the story. And in delta, we have to find our very own access to transcendence, spirituality, and mindfulness. So ideally, everything that happens in those quadrants is in harmony, in accordance with ourselves. However, this isn't necessarily the case. Here, Schulz von Thun brings up the topic of authenticity, of acting in a way that is true to ourselves. And also, he then progresses to the topic of coherence. As you might recall, in communication, coherence is Schulz von Thun's ideal for good communication. Coherence means to have a communication that is authentic, that is true to ourselves, but that is also in accordance with the requirements of the situation, that is also true to the situation. And this idea he now transfers to life as a whole. He also brings up a concept by Durkheim, who distinguished between the world ego and the being ego. The world ego is our self that is visible and tangible to the outside world, the skills we possess, the roles we have, the expectations people place on us, everything. And the being ego is our self in regard to our mind and our soul, our inner self, basically. And in day-to-day life, those two might not be in harmony and in unison, but they might drift apart further and further, and this is, of course, an important risk. Schulz von Thun especially focuses on our roles, because we have to take on several different roles throughout the day in our lives. And those roles place requirements and expectations on us that might not also be and not always be in harmony with our own values and ideals. In this chapter, Schulz von Thun also gives a short guide, a short help to self-discovery in 3 steps. The first step is how we find ourselves, how we realize ourselves. The second is how we like ourselves. And the third is how we invent ourselves. In German, the titles are a play on words that doesn't translate well into English. I won't explain this in detail again. It would be too long for the video, just so you know this is also present. An important topic in this chapter is also individualism and narcissism, because this idea of self-discovery, self-realization is, of course, a popular trend nowadays, and it often goes in a wrong and questionable direction, where people only focus on themselves, become egocentric and selfish, and say, oh, I am important, I have to find myself and realize myself and work on my self-efficacy, and all the other things are uninteresting and unimportant. And this is, of course, the wrong approach to this topic. Narcissism on a society level seems to be a rather important topic nowadays. Schulz von Thun points out several recent books about it. I wasn't actually that aware of it. Maybe we will deal with that topic on the channel in the future. But self-discovery doesn't mean narcissism, doesn't mean egocentrism, and Schulz von Thun clarifies that in this chapter. There is a short closing chapter in the book, last but not least, a short conclusion where Schulz von Thun makes some clarifications and emphasizes some points. One I find very important is that the goal of the whole book and the whole model is primarily to appreciate one's own life, to view it through those 5 aspects, through 5 glasses, as Schulz von Thun says, and to appreciate one's own life and also the lives of others in those aspects. It is not so much about figuring out what you are missing in your life, what you need to do, something like that. It's not, the idea is not to create some kind of to-do list, but it is about appreciating what you have in your life and your life as it is. And Schulz von Thun also points out that obviously we all emphasize different parts, different quadrants in our lives. It's not the same for everybody, and it's certainly not necessarily to place equal importance and emphasis on all of those quadrants, but it is perfectly normal that we have our own priorities. And it is also perfectly normal that events hardly belong to just one quadrant, but that there are fluid transitions between them, and events will usually cover multiple parts of that model. And finally, one topic Schulz von Thun brings up in this small closing chapter is the societal context, because that is something that is not part of the model, but that is quite important for our lives. And Schulz von Thun talks about great challenges societies face, such as in Germany, to overcome the sinister past of the Third Reich and Nazi rule, and to develop into a modern society with a proper legal system and a social system. And looking to the future, he mentions the climate catastrophe that we have to prevent, and all of those things, of course, provide an important context to our lives, especially for the beta quadrant. Let's finally proceed to the critique. I think dealing with this topic of life as a whole and fulfilled life and happy life always is a bit dangerous, because you might end up to just generating wishes. You know, a person who has a perfectly fine, happy life and who is happy about it reads the book, and afterwards that person says, "Oh, my life isn't actually that great. I'm missing this and this and this and this, and to have a happy life, I will have to obtain all of that." And of course, this would be a pretty lousy result for such a book. And this is certainly not what Schulz von Thun does here, because he strongly emphasizes to appreciate the life we have, and not so much wondering what maybe we should acquire, what we need. So this is a good direction, I think. And furthermore, Schulz von Thun also doesn't do some naive, you can do anything if you just wish for it hard enough preaching. He always emphasizes not just self-efficacy, but also humility, also accepting fate and chance. So this is also a very good direction, I think. The book is not that long. We have about 200 pages here, and Schulz von Thun doesn't delve into too much detail here. Just as he does with his models for communication, he provides tools for us. He enables us to understand things so we can deal with them ourselves. He doesn't give us a step-by-step instruction. And this I like, and I think this is a good direction. However, in this book, here and there, I think there could have been some more details. For example, in Alpha, wish fulfillment, Schulz von Thun mentions that we sometimes have wishes or desires that we are not even aware of, and there he just says, well, yeah, you can find help in coaching or even therapy. But he doesn't give any real advice on how to uncover those hidden wishes and desires. And similarly, in Beta, he doesn't discuss how we find our meaning, and doesn't go into a lot of detail there. We have some of it in Omega, as I mentioned, where he gives some advice for finding yourself, self-discovery, but this is rather rare. Overall, this is perfectly fine for me. However, if someone reads the book with the expectation to get very specific instructions, step-by-step instructions, that one will probably be disappointed. As you noticed, Schulz von Thun uses his established models a lot in this book. The square of value and development appears frequently. The inner team makes appearances, and also the communication square. So it is helpful to know those models. They are simple enough. I think you will understand the book without any previous knowledge, but having some will probably make the book more fun to read and help you to really appreciate those sections. For those who really have a chance to read the book in a language they understand, I can recommend my videos about those models. The one about the communication square, the one about the square of values and development, and both videos about the inner team are the most important ones. They will give you a good basis to better understand the book. The book is well written, easy to understand. What I found what was a bit difficult for me is that sometimes the book is a bit kitschy. So, for example, Schulz von Thun quotes a couple of poems. I didn't like that so much, but of course, this is a matter of taste. Other people will probably appreciate it more. I can certainly recommend the book. I think it is a good book for dealing with your life, appreciating your life, thinking about your own life. For younger readers, it is certainly helpful in figuring out what is important for me in my life, which directions do I want to go, what do I want to emphasize. And for older readers, it is even more helpful to appreciate your own life, and of course also to look forward what you want to do in the remainder of your life. I think we often focus primarily on what we want to achieve, where we want to go, how we want to develop, and so on. And I think it is a good idea to really also appreciate that what you have achieved, what we have experienced. And I think this book is very helpful there. What do you think? Let me know in the comments. I'm looking forward to your feedback. And speaking about appreciation, of course, I am quite happy about any appreciation for my work, for example, in the form of a like or a subscription to the channel. We will see each other again next week. For today, I'll take my leave. Have a nice day. See you next time.